This is a questionable reality production.
Hello, I'm Zander Crowns, and this is AP Post History. Now let's get started. Today we'll be covering topic 3.4, Nations and Manufactured Crises. So remember by the year 1047 PQS, for your reference, the Samnites were firmly dissolved into hundreds of successor societies, the most prominent being the 3.5, the Commonwealth of the Commons, the Textots, the Tawads, and Bigger Texas. And while these big four occasionally consumed or annihilated one of those smaller inconsequential societies kind of for the fun of it, or resources, usually resources, there was really minimal interaction between these large societies. Don't get me wrong, they knew about each other and all, and sometimes would conduct obligatory spy missions, but their national interactions with each other went no farther. And this type of lethargic globality continued on for half a century or so. However, these nations began to feel some sorts of midlife crisis coming on, as these nations had no really pronounced national character that seemed so important to others. This crisis of confidence, however, was an issue wholly isolated to government officials and politicians, and not really something the broader populace was concerned about. Even though these government officials and politicians would often talk loudly about the issue, none of their constituents seemed to care very much. In fact, let's turn to the History Makers segment and read an article from the Textot Chronicle on the sentiments of the people. In the past week, there were two major occurrences. The discovery of a Textot labeled utility bot, and the last night re-election rally held by department head Mark Williams. In the rally, Mr. Williams stoked great fears of the Textot's national character and how it was failing its mission as a civilization, and the necessity of action. However, it was observed that about a quarter fell asleep during this moment. Well, another quarter of our nation's populace flocked to see the discovery of that Textot utility bot. It seems the national sentiment could care less about the national character. Despite this not being a popular sentiment, the Big Four met anyways in the first global summit just before the turn of the century. The heads of all these nations actually had quite similar concerns. You see, in the bits and pieces of pre-apocalyptic history that was preserved through the apocalypse, there was always talks of global shenanigans and hijinks leading to crises and dramas that were the spice of life, so to say. And while these leaders understood that sometimes these crises were not fun to live through at all, to them they seemed more interesting and worth the human cost, as the last half-century had been incredibly bland, with no real changes occurring after the collapse of the Samnites, which I guess was a bad thing. So their solution was to conduct a massive world war, which I guess makes sense if you're insane, between each other to revive the old drama of history, which was so necessary to everybody at that time. Many in their governments felt this was a worthwhile goal, because wars were cool, and endless money, I mean incredibly endless money, was to be made around exploring all the nuanced facts and dramas of that war. From books to anti-war art to documentaries, new departments would be made to flesh out the contents surrounding the coming war. To initiate this war, the Big Four made several entangling alliances between each other to make sure everyone would be roped into the conflict by the force of treaty. Then, they brainstormed for about 30 minutes on what the immediate cause of the war should be, which would be that Bigger Texas felt threatened by the revelation that in ancient times, TxDOT stood for the Texas Department of Transportation. They weren't entirely sure what TxDOT actually stood for, but they thought this could be a good guess, and why not? The Commonwealth of the Commons would join the war to support their strong and important ally, Bigger Texas, while the Tawads would sit on the fence for a year or so uncertain whether the war was in their best interest and whatnot, but they would ultimately support the TxDOT Society in their fear of bigger Texas. Quite a tidy and clean affair this whole starting a war thing is. And so an army of international journalists were hired to fill in the gaps of what exactly led to this coming terrible war, and make it feel as if it had been brewing for a long time. To give it that believability factor, you know. The journalists were paid well, and did manufacture a compelling fake history surrounding the false build-up to a largely fake war. Fun. And that's it. Topic 4 of Unit 3 is complete. If you want to find success in your post-history class and make your own fake history, consider subscribing and liking to this video. My goal is to see each and every one of you get a 92 in your class and a 7 on the AP test in Quintober. Alright, Zander Crowns, checking out.